A frantic heartbeat monitors the silence of a sterile delivery room as a woman's desperate screams shatter the air. Victoria Hayes is 38 weeks pregnant, trapped in the agonizing throes of bringing twins into the world. But the man holding her hand, her husband of 5 years, just let go. With a panicked glance at his buzzing phone, he mutters an excuse and runs, leaving her completely alone in her most vulnerable hour. Minutes later, the heavy hospital doors don't open for a returning father. They are violently kicked off their hinges by a ruthless syndicate boss, flanked by armed men, declaring the abandoned mother and her unborn children his property. The fluorescent lights of room 412 at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center buzzed with a low, maddening hum. To Victoria Hayes, the sound was a physical weight pressing down on her skull, magnifying the blinding, visceral agony radiating from her lower spine. She was 38 weeks pregnant with twins, and her body was currently a battlefield of contractions that tore through her every 3 minutes. Sweat plastered her dark hair to her forehead. She gripped the cold metal rails of the hospital bed, her knuckles completely white. "Preston," she gasped, her voice trembling as another wave of pain crashed over her. "Preston, please, hold my hand." Her husband of 5 years was pacing at the foot of the bed, his expensive leather loafers squeaking against the pristine linoleum floor. Preston Hayes didn't look like an expectant father. He looked like a cornered animal. His face, usually handsome and arrogant, was entirely drained of color. He kept wiping his clammy palms on his designer slacks, his eyes darting frantically toward the door, then to his phone, and finally almost reluctantly to his agonizing wife. "I'm here, Tori. I'm right here," Preston muttered, though he made no move to step closer to the bed. His phone vibrated violently in his palm for the 5th time in 10 minutes. Victoria squeezed her eyes shut, trying to breathe through the spike in agony. "The doctor. Where is Dr. Harrison? The epidural is wearing off. I can feel everything." "Preston. Everything." "I'll go check," Preston said, his voice cracking slightly. He looked at his phone screen again, and Victoria saw his throat bob as he swallowed hard. "Just breathe, Victoria, like the classes." She opened her eyes, catching a fleeting glimpse of his screen before he shoved the device into his pocket. She hadn't seen the words, but she recognized the sheer terror in his posture. For the past 6 months, Preston had been acting erratic. Late nights, hushed phone calls in the garage, unexplained withdrawals from their joint savings account. He had blamed it on his failing logistics company, claiming the stress of the impending twins and the collapsing supply chain was keeping him on edge. Victoria, heavily pregnant and exhausted, had believed him. Or, at least, she had wanted to. Suddenly, Nurse Brenda bustled into the room, her eyes sympathetic but her movements brisk and clinical. "All right, Victoria, let's see where we are." "You're doing beautifully, honey." Brenda checked the monitors and lifted the sheets. "Oh, wow. We are at 9 centimeters. You are in transition, sweetheart. These babies are coming tonight. Very soon. Thank God." Victoria sobbed, a mix of relief and terror washing over her. She reached out a shaking hand. "Preston, come here." Preston took a hesitant step forward, his eyes wide. At that exact moment, his phone rang, not a subtle vibration, but a loud, piercing ringtone that made him jump a foot in the air. He pulled it out, and whatever he saw on the caller ID made the last ounce of color vanish from his cheeks. I have to take this," he stammered, backing away toward the door. "Preston, are you kidding me?" Victoria screamed. Another contraction, seizing her abdomen. "I am having your children right now. I'll be right back," he shouted over her cries, his voice shrill with panic. My car is in the loading zone. I have to move the car. The valets are going to tow it. Who cares about the damn car?" Victoria shrieked, but he was already out the door. The heavy wooden door clicked shut behind him, leaving a suffocating silence in his wake, broken only by the steady, rapid beep, beep, beep of the fetal heart monitors. Nurse Brenda frowned deeply, her lips pressing into a thin line. "Don't you worry about him," Victoria. Some men just can't handle the reality of the delivery room. Let me page Dr. Harrison. You just focus on your breathing. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. The contractions were now rolling into one another, offering zero reprieve. Victoria was completely delirious with pain, but an icy, creeping dread began to settle in her chest. Preston hadn't come back. Brenda. Victoria panted, tears streaming down her face. Where is he? Please, call his cell. The nurse walked over to the window that overlooked the hospital's lower drop-off roundabout. Victoria watched the older woman's expression shift from irritation to profound pity. Brenda. What is it? Brenda hesitated, then closed the blinds. Victoria, your husband's car is gone. He sped out of the roundabout about 15 minutes ago. He didn't just move it. He left. The words hit Victoria harder than the contractions. He left. The father of her unborn children, the man who had promised to protect her, had abandoned her in the middle of labor. The betrayal was a physical blow, stealing the air from her lungs. She was entirely alone. A harsh, broken sob tore from her throat as a massive contraction hit, her body bearing down involuntarily. The pain was blinding, but the shattered pieces of her heart hurt infinitely worse. Before Victoria could process the magnitude of Preston's abandonment, the atmosphere in the hospital abruptly shifted. The intercom above the door crackled to life, breaking the tense silence of room 412. Code Silver. Code Silver. All staff, initiate lockdown protocols immediately. Nurse Brenda froze, the fetal monitor printout slipping from her hands. Oh dear God, she whispered. What is it? What does that mean? Victoria asked, panic cutting through her physical agony. It means there's an active threat in the building, Brenda said, her voice shaking as she rushed to the door, locking the deadbolt and turning off the main overhead lights, plunging the room into the dim, eerie glow of the medical equipment. Stay quiet, Victoria. Don't make a sound. Don't make a sound. Victoria wanted to scream. She was crowning. Her body was physically ripping itself apart to bring two human beings into the world, and she was supposed to be quiet? Heavy, methodical footsteps echoed in the hallway outside. They weren't the frantic, rubber-soled steps of doctors and nurses. These were the hard, deliberate strikes of leather-soled shoes, accompanied by the muffled, frantic shouting of hospital security guards. Clear the floor! Nobody leaves. A deep, heavily accented voice ordered from the corridor. Victoria clamped a hand over her own mouth to stifle a scream as another contraction peaked. Tears poured down her face. She was going to give birth in the dark, in terror, entirely alone. Where was Preston? Why was this happening? Thud. A massive weight hit the locked door of her room. Brenda backed away, terrified. Crash. The solid wood door splintered inward, the deadbolt giving way with a metallic screech. The door violently swung open, crashing against the drywall. Two men in tailored dark suits stepped into the room, sweeping the corners with suppressed firearms raised. Once they deemed the room clear of threats, they lowered their weapons and stepped aside. Into the dim light stepped a man who commanded the space. The second his expensive leather shoes crossed the threshold, he was tall, powerfully built, with dark, swept-back hair and eyes as cold and grey as a winter storm. He wore a bespoke charcoal suit that looked entirely out of place in a maternity ward. A thin, superficial cut marred his sharp cheekbone, a single drop of crimson trailing down his jawline, a testament to whatever violence he had just walked through to get here. This was Dante Vitti, and he was not a man who visited hospitals for his health. Dante's cold eyes swept over the terrified nurse huddled in the corner, and then landed on Victoria, who was writhing on the bed, her hospital gown soaked in sweat, her breath coming in ragged, terrified gasps. "Where is Preston Hayes?" Dante demanded. His voice was smooth, cultured, but laced with a lethal undertone that made the hair on Victoria's arms stand up. "He's not here," Victoria gasped, clutching her swollen belly. "Who are you? Get out of my room." Dante took a slow, deliberate step closer to the bed. He looked at the medical monitors, the empty chair beside the bed, and finally, at Victoria's tear-stained, agonized face. His sharp mind connected the dots in a fraction of a second. "The coward ran," Dante murmured, his voice dropping into a dangerous, dark register. He didn't sound surprised. He sounded deeply, violently disgusted. "Please," Nurse Brenda begged, finding her courage. "She's in active labor. You have to leave. She needs a doctor. Bring the doctor here, Matteo." Dante ordered over his shoulder, without taking his eyes off Victoria. One of the armed men nodded and vanished into the chaotic hallway. Dante stepped right up to the side of Victoria's bed. "Listen to me very carefully, Mrs. Hayes," Dante said, his tone shifting from authoritative to chillingly calm. "Your husband owes my organization $3 million. He embezzled from the wrong supply lines, borrowed from the wrong creditors, and gambled away money that belongs to my family. Tonight was the deadline for his debt." Victoria let out a strangled cry as another contraction hit. She shook her head frantically. I don't know anything about that. We don't have that kind of money. He's a logistics manager." "He is a thief," Dante corrected coldly. "And when a man cannot pay his debts in cash, he offers collateral. Do you know what collateral Preston signed over to me when he begged for his life 3 months ago?" Victoria stared up into the terrifying stranger's eyes, her heart hammering against her ribs. "No." Dante reached into the inner breast pocket of his suit jacket and withdrew a folded, notarized document. He tossed it onto the edge of her bed. He signed over his estate, his assets, his life insurance policies. Dante leaned in, his imposing frame casting a dark shadow over her and his family. "He knew we were coming tonight. He abandoned you here to buy himself time to run." The room spun. The monitors beeped in a frantic, terrifying rhythm. Preston had sold them. He had known the mafia was coming, and he had used his pregnant wife in labor as a decoy to escape. "He's a dead man," Dante stated, his voice devoid of emotion. "My men are tracking him down right now. He won't make it to the state line, but the contract remains." "Please," Victoria sobbed, a fresh wave of blinding pain ripping through her pelvis. She couldn't fight. She couldn't run. She was completely at the mercy of a monster. "Please, don't hurt my babies. Kill me if you have to. But please, don't hurt them." Dante stared down at the broken, abandoned woman. For a fleeting second, the cold, impenetrable ice in his grey eyes fractured. He looked at her swollen stomach, the life fighting to enter the world amidst the chaos. In his brutal world, a man who abandoned his blood was the lowest form of scum. But a mother, fighting for her children, that demanded a twisted form of respect. "I am not in the business of killing mothers in their hospital beds," Dante said quietly. He reached out, his large calloused hand surprisingly gentle as he brushed the damp hair away from Victoria's forehead. The touch sent a bizarre, confusing shockwave through her system. "Preston gave up his rights to you. He left his collateral behind. So, the collateral is mine now." "Doctor," Matteo shoved Dr. Harrison into the room. The senior obstetrician was pale, his hands raised in the air, his scrubs trembling. "Do your job, doctor," Dante commanded, stepping back just enough to give the physician room, but maintaining his looming presence beside the bed. "If anything happens to this woman or those children, I will personally ensure you never hold a scalpel again. And I don't mean I'll revoke your medical license." "Doctor." Harrison swallowed hard, nodding frantically as he rushed to the foot of the bed, snapping on a pair of sterile gloves. Okay, Victoria. We have to push. The first baby's heart rate is dropping because of the stress. You need to push now." "I can't," Victoria screamed, shaking her head. The terror of the armed men, the devastating heartbreak of Preston's betrayal, and the sheer physical exhaustion had drained her of all strength. "I have nothing left. I can't do it." "Yes, you can," Dante's voice cut through her panic. It wasn't a request. It was an absolute command. He moved to the side of the bed where Preston was supposed to be. Without hesitation, the ruthless mob boss slid his arm behind Victoria's shoulders, supporting her back, and grabbed her hand with his other. His grip was an iron vice, anchoring her to reality. Victoria's head snapped toward him, her tear-filled eyes wide with shock. This man, a criminal, a killer who had just claimed to own her, was holding her up. "Look at me," Dante ordered, his grey eyes locking onto hers. "Preston is a weak, pathetic coward. You are not. Do not let his failure be the reason these children suffer. Push. Victoria. Fight." The raw, primal authority in his voice sparked a fire deep within her exhausted bones. Anger, pure, unadulterated fury at Preston, surged through her veins, masking the pain. She gripped Dante's hand so hard her nails dug into his skin. And she pushed with a savage scream that echoed off the hospital walls, completely ignoring the armed men guarding the broken doorway. "Good. Keep going. Crowning. I have the head. Doctor," Harrison yelled, his own fear temporarily eclipsed by the medical emergency. Outside the room, the sound of shattered glass and a muffled gunshot rang out. Rival factions? The police? Victoria didn't know. And in that moment, she didn't care. Her entire universe narrowed down to the agonizing pressure in her body and the unyielding strength of the mob boss holding her up. "Keep your eyes on me," Dante muttered, his face inches from hers. "Don't listen to the hallway. Focus." "Ah." Victoria bore down one final time, her vision going white. A sudden, slippery release was instantly followed by the most beautiful sound Victoria had ever heard in her life. The sharp, reedy wail of a newborn infant. "Baby A is a boy, Doctor," Harrison announced, quickly suctioning the infant's airways and passing him to a terrified but highly trained nurse Brenda, who immediately began drying him off. Victoria collapsed back against Dante's arm, sobbing wildly. "My boy, is he okay? He's perfect," Dante said. His voice sounded different, thicker, the dangerous edge momentarily blunted by the sheer miracle he had just witnessed. He stared at the crying infant, a strange, unreadable expression crossing his hardened features. But the moment of peace was fleeting. "Victoria, we aren't done," Dr. Harrison warned urgently. "Baby B is descending fast. We need to go again. Next contraction. Push." The pain returned with a vengeance. Victoria squeezed her eyes shut, and Dante adjusted his grip, pulling her slightly more upright. "One more, Victoria. You're almost done. Breathe." 5 minutes later, after 3 more agonizing pushes that drained the very last drop of adrenaline from her system, the second cry filled the room. "Baby B is a girl," Dr. Harrison panted, clearly relieved to have the medical portion of this nightmare concluded. He clamped and cut the cords, with shaking hands. Victoria was sobbing, her chest heaving as the nurses quickly checked the infants. They were small twins, usually were, but their cries were strong and healthy. "Give them to me," Victoria whispered, reaching out weakly. Brenda brought the 2 tightly swaddled bundles to Victoria's chest. The moment the warm weight of her son and daughter pressed against her skin, the horror of the world faded away. They were beautiful, tiny, pink, and perfect. Dante stepped back, finally releasing her hand. He stood at the foot of the bed, watching the scene. His men were securing the perimeter, murmuring rapidly into earpieces. "Boss," Matteo interrupted, stepping cautiously into the room. "The police have locked down the block. SWAT is staging downstairs. We have the rooftop secured. The chopper is 2 minutes out." Dante didn't look at his lieutenant. He kept his eyes on Victoria and the twins. "Prepare the medical transport team on the roof. We are moving them." Victoria's head snapped up, terror instantly returning, replacing the maternal bliss. She clutched her babies tighter to her chest. "No, no, you can't take us, please. They were just born." Street Jude's is compromised, Victoria, Dante said flatly. Preston didn't just owe me. He owed the Albanian syndicate, and they are the ones shooting up the lobby downstairs looking for him. If I leave you here, they will slaughter you and these children just to send a message. Victoria froze. The gunshots she had heard hadn't been Dante's men. It was someone else. Preston had buried them under a mountain of debt with multiple monsters. You and the twins belong to the Vitti family now, Dante stated, stepping forward and pulling a heavy cashmere overcoat from his arm, draping it over Victoria to keep her and the babies warm. And the Vitti family protects what is theirs. You are coming with me, and no one will ever touch a hair on your heads again. Dr. Harrison tried to protest. You can't move a postpartum mother and premature twins in a helicopter. Dante shot the doctor a glare that silenced him instantly. I have a private neonatal intensive care unit waiting at my estate, staffed with better doctors than you. Sedate her if you must, but prep her for transport. Now, Victoria looked down at her son and daughter. She was entirely trapped. Her husband had left them for dead, and her only savior was the devil himself. As Dante's men carefully lifted her onto a mobile transport gurney, she looked up at the dark, imposing figure of Dante Vitti. Why? She whispered, her voice barely audible over the sirens, now wailing outside the hospital windows. Why are you keeping us? Dante paused, looking down at the terrified woman, holding the two fragile lives against her chest. He didn't answer right away. He just reached out, his thumb gently brushing the cheek of the sleeping baby boy. Because a man who abandons his blood deserves to lose it to a man who knows its value, Dante said softly. Sleep, Victoria. When you wake up, your old life will be dead, and a new one will begin. Before she could process the weight of his words, Nurse Brenda, crying silently, injected a mild sedative into Victoria's IV line, as ordered by the Mafia Bosses' men. The edges of Victoria's vision began to blur. The last thing she saw before slipping into darkness was Dante Vitti standing over her gurney like a dark guardian angel, his gun drawn as he led her and her newborns out into the chaotic, flashing lights of the hospital hallway. Consciousness returned to Victoria not with a jolt, but with the slow, drifting sensation of a boat settling against a soft dock. The blinding, sterile lights and the harsh chemical smells of Street Jude's medical center were gone. Instead, she opened her eyes to the warm, golden glow of morning sunlight filtering through sheer silk drapes. Panic, sharp and visceral, seized her chest the moment her memory caught up with her waking mind. Preston, the betrayal, the hospital under siege, the man in the charcoal suit. My babies, Victoria gasped. Struggling to sit up, her body screamed in protest, a dull, heavy ache settling deep in her pelvis. A stark reminder of the grueling labor. Mrs. Hayes, please, lie still. You risk tearing your sutures. A woman's voice, calm and deeply professional, came from the corner of the expansive room. Victoria's head whipped around. She was in a bed larger than her entire apartment bedroom, swathed in Egyptian cotton. To her right, bathed in the soft light, were two state-of-the-art neonatal incubators. Standing beside them was a woman in pristine white medical scrubs. She had warm, intelligent eyes and silver hair pulled back into a neat bun. I am Dr. Aris Thorne, the woman said, stepping forward with a reassuring smile. I am the head neonatologist for the Vitti family. Your children are safe, Victoria. They are resting beautifully. Victoria ignored the pain and swung her legs over the edge of the mattress, her bare feet hitting a plush, heated rug. She stumbled toward the incubators, tears springing to her eyes. Through the clear, temperature-controlled acrylic, she saw them, her son and her daughter. They were no longer swaddled in rough hospital blankets, but in impossibly soft, fine cotton. Their tiny chests rose and fell in a steady, peaceful rhythm. They were slightly premature, as is common with twins. Dr. Thorne explained gently, placing a hand on Victoria's shoulder to steady her. but their lung development is excellent. Mr. Vitti spared no expense. This room is equipped with better pediatric technology than Cedars-Sinai. You and the children are completely safe here. Mr. Vitti. The name sent a shiver down Victoria's spine. Dante Vitti, the mafia boss who had claimed her as collateral for her husband's insurmountable debts. Where am I? Victoria whispered, her fingers tracing the edge of her son's incubator. You are at the Vitti estate in the Santa Monica Mountains. A deep, baritone voice answered from the doorway. Victoria turned. Dante stood leaning against the heavy mahogany doorframe. He had shed the blood-speckled suit from the night before, now wearing a simple black cashmere sweater and dark trousers that somehow made his towering frame look even more intimidating. He held a steaming cup of coffee, his grey eyes fixed on her with an unreadable intensity. Dr. Thorne offered a polite nod to Dante and quietly slipped out of the room, closing the door with a soft click. You shouldn't be walking, Dante said, pushing off the doorframe and closing the distance between them. Dr. Thorne said your physical trauma was severe. I don't care about my trauma, Victoria snapped, her maternal instinct completely overriding her fear of the dangerous man standing before her. I want to know what happens now. You saved us from the hospital, and I am grateful for that. But we are not property. You cannot keep us here. Dante took a slow sip of his coffee, his gaze drifting to the sleeping twins. You are severely underestimating the danger you are in, Victoria. If I let you walk out the front gates of this estate, you and those children will be dead before the sun sets. Victoria swallowed hard, the fight draining from her as the reality of her situation settled in. The Albanians? The Krasniki syndicate, Dante corrected, his jaw tightening. Besnik Krasniki, to be exact. Preston didn't just embezzle from my logistics routes. He stole a shipment of uncut diamonds belonging to Besnik, intending to fence them to pay me off. When he lost the diamonds in a botched deal, he painted a target on his back and yours. Victoria covered her mouth, a sob tearing at her throat. Preston, the man she had loved, the man who had complained about the rising cost of groceries, was moving blood diamonds and stealing from international crime syndicates. It was incomprehensible. Why didn't he tell me? She cried, sinking into a plush armchair beside the incubators. We were supposed to be a team. Men like Preston do not view their wives as partners, Dante said coldly. He set his coffee cup down on a side table and crouched in front of her, forcing her to look into his stormy grey eyes. They view them as accessories, and when the ship sinks, they throw the heaviest baggage overboard to save themselves. Victoria hated the truth in his words. She had felt Preston pulling away for months, dismissing her concerns, gaslighting her into believing her pregnancy hormones were making her paranoid. Did your men find him? She asked, her voice trembling. Part of her hoped Preston was dead. Another, deeply ingrained part of her humanity was terrified of the answer. No, Dante admitted, his brow furrowing in irritation. He had a secondary extraction team waiting 3 blocks from Street Jude's. He slipped the net. But Besnik's men are tearing Los Angeles apart, looking for him, and they know my men pulled you out of the maternity ward. So, what am I to you? Victoria asked, wrapping her arms around her shivering frame. A bargaining chip. Are you going to trade me and my babies to Besnik for the money Preston owes you? Dante's eyes darkened ominously. The air in the room suddenly felt 20 degrees colder. He stood up, towering over her, radiating a quiet, lethal fury. I do not trade women and infants to butchers, Dante growled, his thick Italian accent bleeding through his perfectly enunciated English. I brought you into my home to protect you. The debt Preston owes me is null and void the moment he abandoned you to die. As of last night, you and those children are under the absolute protection of the Vitti family. No one touches you. Not Besnik. Not Preston. No one. Victoria stared at him, entirely bewildered. Why? Why would you absorb that kind of risk for a stranger? Dante looked away, his gaze falling once more on the tiny, fragile life sleeping in the incubator. For a fleeting second, the ruthless mafia boss looked incredibly weary. "Because I know what it is like to be left behind by a coward," Dante said softly. "Rest, Victoria. Name your children. You are safe here." With that, he turned and strode out of the room, leaving Victoria alone with a swirling vortex of confusion, terror, and a bizarre, unbidden sense of absolute security. 3 weeks passed inside the gilded cage of the Vitti estate. To Victoria's shock, Dante was true to his word. She was treated not as a prisoner, but as an honored guest. The estate was a fortress, heavily guarded by armed men patrolling the sprawling gardens and high stone walls. But inside, it was a sanctuary. Dr. Thorne visited daily, ensuring Victoria's postpartum recovery was seamless. A private chef prepared nutrient-rich meals, and a team of silent, efficient maids kept the nursery immaculate. Victoria named the twins Leo and Elena. She spent her days entirely devoted to them, feeding them, rocking them, and marveling at their resilience. Yet, the shadow of the outside world constantly loomed over her. She knew a war was brewing over her head. Dante was a phantom during the days, locked in his study or entirely absent from the estate, managing the fallout of Preston's spectacular mess. But every evening, without fail, he would visit the nursery. At first, Victoria would tense up when he entered, intimidated by the sheer aura of violence that clung to him like expensive cologne. But over time, a strange routine developed. Dante would wash his hands, remove his suit jacket, and sit in the leather armchair opposite hers. He rarely spoke, choosing instead to watch the twins with an intensity that baffled Victoria. One evening, Elena was unusually fussy, crying inconsolably despite Victoria's exhausted efforts to soothe her. "May I?" Dante asked. Stepping forward, Victoria hesitated, then slowly handed the tiny, red-faced infant to the towering crime boss. Dante's large, calloused hands that had undoubtedly ended lives, cradled the delicate baby with shocking reverence. He tucked Elena against his broad chest, right over his heart, and began to pace the room with a slow, rhythmic sway. He hummed a low, melodic tune in Italian. Within minutes, Elena's cries hitched, and she fell fast asleep. Tiny fists curled against Dante's cashmere sweater. Victoria watched, entirely mesmerized. "You're good at that." Dante didn't look up, his eyes fixed on the baby's sleeping face. "I helped raise my younger sister. My mother was unwell. My father was gone." It was the most he had ever spoken about his past. Before Victoria could ask him more, the heavy oak doors of the nursery swung open. Matteo, Dante's right-hand man, stepped inside. His face was grim, a stark contrast to the peaceful atmosphere of the nursery. "Boss," Matteo said, his eyes darting apologetically to Victoria. "We need you downstairs. It's urgent." Dante carefully handed Elena back to Victoria, his demeanor instantly shifting from gentle protector back to the ruthless syndicate leader. "I will be right back. Lock the door behind me." Victoria clutched Elena to her chest, her heart hammering as she heard the heavy lock slide into place. She placed the baby in her crib next to Leo and pressed her ear against the thick oak door. She couldn't hear the exact words, but she could hear the aggressive, rapid cadence of Matteo's voice, followed by the terrifying, booming roar of Dante's fury. 10 minutes later, the lock clicked, and Dante re-entered. His jaw was clenched, so tight a muscle ticked violently in his cheek. "What happened?" Victoria demanded, stepping in front of the cribs as if to shield them. Dante looked at her, his eyes entirely devoid of warmth. "They found Preston." Victoria's breath hitched. Is he dead?" "No," Dante spat, running a hand through his dark hair. "Unfortunately, he is very much alive. Besnik Krasnicki's men caught him trying to cross the border into Mexico. They have him locked in a warehouse in Long Beach. A complicated knot of emotions twisted in Victoria's stomach. Anger, pity, and sheer terror. What do they want? Besnick sent a messenger. He offered a trade, Dante said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, lethal register. Preston gave them everything. He told them you were here. He told them about the twins. Besnick knows that keeping you is costing me resources and manpower. He offered to hand Preston over to me, along with the $3 million he owes my family, in exchange for one thing. Victoria felt the blood drain from her face. Her knees suddenly felt weak. Me. Dante nodded slowly. He wants you. And the children. He knows it will humiliate me to surrender my collateral. It is a power play. Besnick wants to parade you in front of the commission to prove the Vitti family is weak. The room spun. Victoria grabbed the edge of the changing table to steady herself. Preston had sold them out again. Even while captured, he was using her and their newborn babies as a shield to save his own pathetic life. So, Victoria whispered, tears finally spilling over her lashes. When do I pack? Dante froze. He stared at her, genuine shock breaking through his hardened exterior. What? When do I pack? She repeated, her voice cracking. $3 million, and the man who stole from you. It's the logical business decision, Dante. I know what I am. I'm a liability. I'm a massive target on your back. Just, please, let me keep the babies together. Whatever Besnick does to me, please make sure they stay together. In 2 massive strides, Dante crossed the room. He grabbed her by the upper arms, his grip firm but careful not to bruise her. He hauled her against his chest, forcing her to look up into his blazing, furious eyes. Do not ever speak like that again, Dante snarled, his face inches from hers. Do you hear me? You are not a liability. You are not a bargaining chip. Dante, be reasonable, Victoria cried, struggling against his grip, overwhelmed by the sheer intensity of his presence. He has an army. You can't start a gang war over a woman you met 3 weeks ago. I don't give a damn about the army. Dante roared, shaking her slightly. Besnick Krasniqi could bring the entire Albanian cartel to my gates, and I would burn Los Angeles to the ground before I hand you over to them. Victoria stopped struggling. Her wide, tear-filled eyes locked onto his. She could see the absolute, terrifying sincerity in his gaze. He wasn't posturing. He meant every single word. Why? She breathed, the question pulling from the deepest depths of her soul. Dante's grip on her arms softened, his hands sliding up to cup her face. His thumbs gently wiped away the tears, tracking down her pale cheeks. Because Preston gave up his rights, Dante whispered, his voice incredibly tender, a shocking contrast to the violent words he had just spoken. He abandoned you, but I never will. You are mine to protect now, Victoria. Leo and Elena are under my roof. They are Vitti blood by right of sanctuary. I will not fail you. The declaration hung in the air, heavy and vibrating, with a sudden, undeniable intimacy. Victoria stared up at Dante, her chest heaving, her mind struggling to reconcile the ruthless mafia boss with the man currently holding her face with such profound gentleness. For 5 years, she had begged Preston for a fraction of this devotion. She had pleaded for his attention, for his protection, only to be tossed aside the moment it became inconvenient. Yet here was a man who owed her nothing, a criminal who lived in the shadows, willing to declare war on the city to keep her safe. Dante, she whispered, her hands instinctively coming up to rest on his chest. She could feel the rapid, heavy thud of his heart beneath the fine cashmere. Dante looked down at her lips, his grey eyes darkening with a raw, primal hunger that he had meticulously kept hidden for the past 3 weeks. The tension between them, previously born of fear and circumstance, morphed instantly into something searingly hot and entirely dangerous. You make me forget my sanity, Mia Luce, Dante murmured, his forehead resting against hers. I should lock you away in a vault where the world can never touch you. I don't want to be in a vault, Victoria breathed, surprising herself with her own boldness. She didn't feel like a captive anymore. She felt seen. She felt cherished in a twisted, chaotic way that finally made her feel alive. Dante groaned, a low, guttural sound, and leaned in. His lips brushed hers a feather-light touch, testing the waters, giving her every opportunity to pull away. When she didn't, when she actually leaned up into him, the dam broke. He kissed her, and it was nothing like the polite, practiced kisses Preston used to give her. It was possessive, desperate, and completely consuming. Dante's arms wrapped tightly around her waist, pulling her flush against his solid frame. Victoria let out a soft sigh, tangling her fingers in the dark hair at the nape of his neck, kissing him back with a fierce, pent-up need she didn't know she harbored. For a few suspended moments, the impending war, the debts, and the danger ceased to exist. There was only the heat of his mouth, the strength of his arms, and the overwhelming realization that she was falling for the monster who had saved her. Suddenly, a blaring, mechanical siren shattered the quiet intimacy of the nursery. The sound was deafening, a high-pitched wail that instantly woke both twins, sending them into a chorus of terrified shrieks. Red strobe lights began flashing outside the heavily reinforced windows. Dante broke the kiss instantly, his romantic demeanor vanishing like smoke in a hurricane. He was purely predatory now, his hand automatically reaching to the holster concealed beneath his sweater. Matteo's voice crackled through the intercom, mounted on the nursery wall, completely frantic. "Boss! Perimeter breach at the south gate." Two heavily armored Suburbans just rammed the barricade. They have explosives. "It's Besnick's men. Lock down the safe room," Dante ordered over the comms, his voice barking with absolute authority. "No one gets to the second floor. Shoot to kill." Dante turned to Victoria, grabbing her by the shoulders. The softness from seconds ago was entirely replaced by lethal focus. "Listen to me. You need to get the babies. We are moving to the panic room beneath the sub-basement." "Now? They're here?" Victoria panicked, rushing to the cribs. Her hands were shaking violently as she scooped up a crying Leo, while Dante expertly grabbed Elena, cradling the infant securely against his chest with one arm while drawing his Glock 19 with his free hand. "Besnick decided not to wait for my answer," Dante stated grimly, kicking the heavy oak door open and scanning the hallway. The massive estate was plunged into chaos. The sound of automatic gunfire erupted from the lower levels, echoing terrifyingly up the grand marble staircase. The smell of sulfur and smoke began to drift through the ventilation system. The war had officially arrived at their doorstep. "Stay behind me," Dante ordered, grabbing Victoria's arm and pulling her down the dimly lit corridor toward a concealed service elevator. "Do not let go of my jacket. If we get separated, you run for the vault. Do you understand? I won't leave you." Victoria cried, terrified of losing the only protector she had ever known. Dante stopped in front of the elevator, pressing his hand against the biometric scanner. The doors slid open. He shoved her inside and stepped in after her, hitting the button for the sub-basement. As the doors began to close, a massive explosion shook the foundation of the house, throwing Victoria against the steel wall of the elevator. Through the narrowing gap of the elevator doors, Dante made eye contact with her, his expression a mask of pure, unadulterated violence. "You aren't going to lose me, Victoria," Dante vowed as the doors finally sealed shut, plunging them into the descent. "But tonight, Besnick Krasniqi is going to learn exactly what happens when you threaten my family." End of parts 4, 5, and 6. The elevator descent felt like a plunge into the center of the earth. The thick steel walls muffled the chaotic symphony of automatic gunfire and structural explosions echoing through the upper floors of the Vitti estate. Inside the small, reinforced carriage, the air was thick with the smell of cordite and the panicked cries of the twins. Victoria clutched Leo to her chest, her breathing shallow and rapid. Opposite her, Dante stood like a marble statue of a war god, cradling a wailing Elena in one arm, while his other hand gripped his Glock 19. His grey eyes were fixed on the digital floor indicator, his jaw tight enough to crack stone. "They brought a small army," Dante muttered, his voice cold and calculating. "Besnik is desperate. He knows his territory is collapsing, and taking you was his last gambit to humiliate me before the commission." "Dante, what happens if they breach the sub-basement?" Victoria asked, her voice trembling. The reality of the violence happening just above their heads was paralyzing. "They won't," Dante replied instantly, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of concern. "The safe room is encased in 3 feet of reinforced concrete and titanium alloy plating. It runs on a closed-circuit ventilation system and a separate power grid. Even if they level the mansion, you will be untouched." The elevator shuddered to a harsh stop, and the heavy doors slid open with a pneumatic hiss. They stepped out into a stark, brightly lit concrete corridor that looked more like a military bunker than the basement of a luxury estate. Dante led her swiftly down the hall to a massive, circular vault door. He pressed his hand to a biometric scanner, punched in a 12-digit code, and leaned in for a retinal scan. The heavy internal locking mechanisms groaned, and the door swung outward. Inside, the safe room was a jarring contrast to its exterior. It was fully furnished, resembling a high-end studio apartment. But what caught Victoria's eye was the corner dedicated entirely to the twins. 2 brand-new cribs, an industrial supply of Similac formula, diapers, and a duplicate of the medical equipment from the nursery upstairs. Dante had prepared for this exact nightmare. "Put them down," Dante instructed gently, guiding her toward the cribs. Victoria laid Leo down, and Dante placed Elena beside him. The babies, exhausted from the sudden noise and movement, began to settle into a fussy sleep. Dante turned to a heavy steel cabinet on the far wall, unlocking it to reveal an arsenal of high-caliber weaponry. He swapped his handgun for a Heckler & Koch MP5 submachine gun, slamming a fresh magazine into the receiver. He then grabbed a smaller, compact Sig Sauer P365 and turned back to Victoria. "Take this," he said, pressing the cold metal of the firearm into her trembling hands. "The safety is off. Point and pull the trigger. Do not hesitate." Victoria stared at the gun, entirely horrified. "You're leaving us down here? I have to command my men." "Victoria," Dante said, stepping close and cupping her cheek with his free hand. His thumb traced her jawline, his touch grounding her amidst the spiraling panic. "Matteo is holding the grand foyer, but they are taking heavy casualties. I cannot let Besnik's forces establish a foothold in my home. I have to end the snake by cutting off its head. Please," Victoria whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "Don't go. They'll kill you." Dante offered a tight, dangerous smile. "Men have been trying to kill me since I was 19 years old, Mia Luce. They always fail. Lock this door the second I step out. Do not open it for anyone but me. If you hear Matteo's voice, you verify it through the security feed first." He leaned down, pressing a hard, desperate kiss to her lips, a promise of return before pulling away, and striding out of the vault. "Close it," he barked from the corridor. Victoria hit the heavy red button on the interior wall. The massive titanium door swung shut, the locks engaging with a resounding, definitive thud. She was alone. Silence descended on the safe room, absolute and suffocating. Victoria walked over to the bank of security monitors mounted above a sleek desk. The screens displayed the carnage unfolding above. The beautiful, manicured gardens were torn to shreds by gunfire. The grand foyer was filled with smoke, Dante's men trading fire with heavily armored Albanian mercenaries. Minutes bled into an eternity. Victoria paced the room, the Sig Sauer heavy and foreign in her grip. Suddenly, the monitor displaying the sub-basement antechamber flickered. Victoria stopped dead. Her blood turned to ice. A figure was moving through the corridor outside the vault, It wasn't one of the heavily armed Albanian mercenaries in tactical gear. It was a man in a rumpled, dirt-stained designer suit, holding a simple handgun. He moved with a frantic, cowardly urgency, checking over his shoulder every few seconds. He approached the biometric scanner. He didn't try to break it. Instead, he pulled a small, black decryption drive from his pocket, a high-level override tool used by the logistics managers of the Viti enterprise, and plugged it into the manual maintenance port beneath the keypad. Victoria stared at the screen, her breath catching in her throat. It was Preston. The digital keypad on the vault door began to cycle rapidly through numerical combinations. Preston was bypassing the secondary locks. As the former head of Dante's Shadow Logistics, Preston had overseen the installation of the security mainframes for several of the Viti properties. Dante had changed the codes, but Preston had kept a backdoor access drive for leverage. The intercom on the wall crackled to life. "Tori, Tori, are you in there?" Preston's voice, whiny and thick with panic, filtered into the safe room. "I know you're in there. The grid shows the vault is occupied." Victoria felt a wave of nausea wash over her. Hearing the voice of the man who had abandoned her in the delivery room just weeks ago sent a violent tremor through her hands. "Open the door, Victoria," Preston pleaded, his tone shifting from frantic to demanding. "Besnik's men are slaughtering Viti's guards upstairs. Dante is probably already dead. You have to let me in so we can escape." "Escape?" Victoria whispered to herself, absolute fury replacing her terror. She pressed the talk button on the console. "You abandoned me, Preston. You left me screaming in a hospital bed while you ran. Tori! Thank God! Listen to me!" Preston shouted through the speaker, slapping his hand against the thick steel door. "I had to run. If they caught me, they would have killed me. I did it to protect you." "You sold us to Besnik," Victoria screamed, gripping the edge of the console. "You told them where we were. You offered me and your own children to a monster to save your pathetic life." There was a brief pause on the other side of the intercom. When Preston spoke again, the mask of the loving, misunderstood husband dropped entirely. His voice became cold and desperate. "They don't want you, Victoria. They want the babies. Besnik said if I bring him one of Dante's newly claimed heirs, he'll wipe my debt clean and give me safe passage to Europe. Just give me one of them. Tori, you have two. You can make more. If I don't give them a baby, they're going to skin me alive." The sheer, unfathomable depravity of his words hit Victoria like a physical blow. He wasn't here to save them. He had infiltrated the one place she was supposed to be safe to kidnap his own infant child and trade them to a cartel. Victoria looked at the cribs. Leo and Elena were sleeping peacefully, oblivious to the monster. Standing just feet away, she turned back to the monitors. The decryption program on Preston's drive hit 100%. The heavy internal locks of the vault groaned. The green light flashed. The door began to slowly swing open. Preston stepped into the vault, his eyes wild, his hair matted with sweat and dust. He raised his handgun, pointing it erratically around the room before his eyes locked onto the cribs. "I'm sorry, Tori," Preston panted, stepping toward the babies. "I really am, but it's me. Or them." "Stop right there." Preston froze. He turned his head. Victoria stood between him and the cribs. Both of her hands were wrapped tightly around the grip of the Sig Sauer P365 Dante had given her. Her arms were raised, her stance wide, and the barrel was pointed directly at the center of Preston's chest. Her hands were shaking, but her eyes, once filled with unconditional love and submission, were now as cold and unforgiving as Dante Viti's. "Victoria, put the gun down," Preston scoffed, though he took a nervous step back. "You don't even know how to turn the safety off. You're not a killer." "Dante took the safety off for me," Victoria said, her voice eerily calm. "Take one more step toward my children, Preston, and I swear to God, I will empty this magazine into your heart." Preston's face twisted into an ugly sneer. "You think you're one of them now? You think Viti actually cares about you?" You're just a shiny new toy. Put the gun down, you stupid. Preston raised his weapon, aiming it at Victoria. Bang! The deafening crack of a gunshot echoed in the concrete room. But the recoil didn't come from Victoria's hands. Preston screamed, dropping his gun as his right knee exploded in a mist of crimson. He collapsed to the floor, writhing and clutching his shattered leg in agony. Standing in the doorway of the vault, silhouetted by the flickering emergency lights of the corridor, was Dante. His face was smeared with soot and blood. A deep laceration ran down his left bicep, soaking his sleeve, but his grey eyes were ablaze with a murderous, unholy rage. He held his MP5 in one hand, smoke still curling from the barrel. You should have stayed in Mexico, Preston, Dante growled, stepping over the threshold. The sheer predatory aura radiating from him sucked the oxygen out of the room. Preston scrambled backward, leaving a smear of blood on the pristine floor, sobbing openly. Viti! Wait! Wait! Besnik made me do it. He put a gun to my head. Dante didn't blink. He walked slowly toward the pathetic, bleeding man on the floor. Besnik Krasniqi is currently bleeding out in my rose garden with a bullet in his throat. His men are dead. You are the only rat left in my house. Preston looked wildly at Victoria. Tori, please. Tell him to let me go. I'm the father of your children. Victoria didn't lower her gun. She looked at the pathetic, weeping coward bleeding on the floor, and then at the imposing, bloodied mafia boss who had just fought through an army to keep his promise to her. You aren't their father, Victoria said coldly, the last frayed thread of her past life snapping completely. She lowered the gun, turning her back on Preston and looking directly at Dante. Get this piece of garbage out of my nursery. Dante's expression softened instantly as he looked at her. The primal pride in his eyes was unmistakable. He raised his hand, and Matteo, battered but alive, stepped into the vault behind him. Take him to the warehouse, Dante ordered without looking away from Victoria. Make sure he understands exactly what it costs to threaten my family before you end it. No! Tori! Please! Preston screamed as Matteo grabbed him by the collar, dragging him mercilessly out of the vault and down the corridor. His screams echoed until the heavy steel door slammed shut once more, sealing the monster out forever. The silence that followed was profound. The adrenaline that had been keeping Victoria upright evaporated in a sudden, dizzying rush. She dropped the handgun onto the desk and sank to her knees on the cold concrete floor, covering her face with her hands as violent sobs finally racked her body. She heard the clatter of Dante dropping his weapon, followed by his heavy footsteps. He sank to his knees in front of her, ignoring the blood dripping from his wounded arm. He wrapped his large, uninjured arm tightly around her waist, pulling her flush against his broad chest. It's over, Dante murmured into her hair, his lips pressing against the crown of her head. You are safe. The children are safe. He can never hurt you again. Victoria clung to his sweater, burying her face in his neck, breathing in the scent of smoke, rain, and the unique, spicy cologne that was entirely him. You're hurt, she cried, pulling back to look at the deep gash on his arm. It's nothing, Dante dismissed, though he winced slightly as she touched the fabric. A grazing shot. My medic will stitch it upstairs. He reached up, wiping the tears from her cheeks with his thumb. His grey eyes, usually so guarded and cold, were completely open, filled with a terrifying, raw vulnerability. When I heard him on the security feed, when I realized he had bypassed the outer lock, Dante's voice broke slightly. The ruthless syndicate boss, momentarily replaced by a man terrified of losing his world. I thought I was too late. I thought I had failed you. You didn't, Victoria whispered fiercely, cupping his bruised face in her hands. You saved us. Again. But Dante, I was ready. I would have shot him. I know you would have, Dante smiled, a genuine, breathtaking curve of his lips. You are the bravest woman I have ever known, Victoria. You are a queen entirely worthy of the Viti name. He leaned in, and this time, the kiss was not desperate or hurried. It was a seal, a vow forged in blood, gunpowder, and an unbreakable devotion. Victoria kissed him back with everything she had, surrendering entirely to the dark, dangerous world she had been thrust into, because in the center of that darkness was the only man who had ever truly loved her. Months later, the scars of that night had faded, though the legend of the siege on the Vitti estate became a whispered myth in the Los Angeles underworld. Besnik Krasnicki's empire was absorbed by Dante, doubling his territory and cementing his absolute dominance over the West Coast. Preston Hayes simply vanished, a ghost story serving as a warning to anyone foolish enough to cross the family. In the sunlit gardens of the estate, Victoria sat on a woven blanket, watching 6-month-old Leo and Elena happily babbling as they destroyed a tower of wooden blocks. She wore a simple white sundress, but on her left ring finger sat a breathtaking, flawless 4-carat diamond, a stone Dante had secured legitimately, refusing to let any shadow touch her. Heavy, familiar footsteps approached across the manicured lawn. Dante appeared, having just returned from a meeting with the commission. He had taken off his suit jacket, his sleeves rolled up to reveal the faint silver scar on his bicep. He didn't go to his study. He didn't check his phone. He walked straight to the blanket, dropping down onto the grass beside his wife. He scooped up a giggling Elena, pressing a kiss to her chubby cheek, before leaning over to capture Victoria's lips in a slow, lingering kiss. "How was the city?" Victoria asked, resting her head against his shoulder. "Quiet," Dante murmured, his eyes fixed purely on his family, the only empire he truly cared about. "Exactly how I demand it to be for you." The cruelest betrayals often pave the path to our most profound awakenings. Victoria Hayes was left to bleed out in the sterile isolation of a hospital room, abandoned by a man who viewed her as nothing more than disposable collateral. Yet, from the ashes of that shattering heartbreak, she found a protector in the most unexpected of places, a ruthless syndicate boss who understood that true strength isn't measured by violence, but by an unwavering devotion to one's blood. Dante Vitti stormed into her life as a conqueror claiming a debt, but he ultimately surrendered his own heavily guarded heart to the mother of the children he swore to protect. Together, they forged an empire built not just on power and fear, but on a fiercely, fiercely protective love that no enemy and no ghost from the past could ever tear apart.